Hello, YouTubers, friends, compatriots. Bootlicker, shells, nestlights, stars, passels, passels. I'm a useful idiot, and I want to talk about the IRS and the involvement in politics. Because it turns out there's a long history, and I'm glad to get this information because it backs up a lot of my assertions about this IRS scandal. And I've done a couple videos on it already and have revealed some of my feelings about it. And it has a lot in common with the Benghazi hearings and all the uproar about Benghazi as well. It's a lot of ways it's a manufactured scandal because, as I pointed out in my last video on Benghazi, we also have a long history of those sort of incidents, and the fact that it's being used now for political opportunism is just part of a long tradition. So anyway, let's get to the meat of this because this backs up all my assertions. And it's all based on a book by David Burnham called, quote, A Law Unto Itself, the IRS and the Abuse of Power, unquote. And this was published in 1990. So there's already a 25-year history since this book was written. And so I filled in some of the blanks. But interesting quotes right off the bat. Right off the bat he says, quote, in almost every administration since the IRS's inception, the information and power of the tax agency has been mobilized for explicitly political purposes, unquote. That is the conclusion of this book, and that is the premise of my argument. And so let's go through a little brief history. I think it's almost quaint in the old days. There's an anecdote from this book in about 1925 when the IRS Commissioner, David Blair, personally delivered a demand for $10 million in back taxes to Republican Senator from Michigan, James Couzens, right at the doorsteps of the Senate. Because Michigan Senator James Couzens had launched an investigation into the IRS. So in the old days, they were pretty blatant about it. And of course, as the years went on, they've got increasingly sophisticated to the point where we are now. Under Franklin Delano Roosevelt, he used the IRS to harass newspaper publishers who were opposed to the New Deal, including people like Randolph Hearst. He also went after political rivals like Huey Long and Father Coughlin and Andrew Mellon. Andrew Mellon was the ex-Treasury Secretary who was running for office. And Huey Long was a New Orleans politician who had a lot of very socialist and idealistic views. But a man after my own heart because he didn't see any difference between Republicans and Democrats. And Father Coughlin was a notable figure in the 30s, basically railing against the Federal Reserve System. So he also was a good guy in some respects. And in 1944, Franklin Delano Roosevelt even spiked an IRS audit of illegal campaign contributions to Congressman Lyndon B. Johnson in 1944. And that could have conceivably derailed Johnson's whole political career had this information come out at the time. So following President Lyndon B. Johnson, President Kennedy, very notable in many ways, but in some ways, another politician. And he spoke of expecting the IRS to be vigilant in policing the tax-exempt status of, quote, questionable, unquote, organizations, i.e. conservative groups. Much the way that Obama is doing now, or assuming Obama had anything to do with it. It's certainly not clear yet. But President Kennedy wanted them to police the tax-exempt status of conservative organizations. In fact, within days after that quote by Kennedy, the IRS launched the Ideological Organizations Audit Project, which targeted conservative groups. And Kennedy also used the IRS to strong-arm companies that were resisting so-called voluntary price controls. And the common method to deal with people who are targeted is to single them out for audits. And no surprise, when Richard Nixon became president, he created a special services staff to run IRS activities against so-called extremist groups. And between 1969 and 1973, he targeted over 10,000 groups and individuals, including the John Birch Society. And the IRS was also given Nixon's enemies list to, in the words of White House counsel John Dean, quote, use the available federal machinery to screw our political enemies, unquote. And I want to going to languish on that quote for a moment, because that's at the very heart of one of my premises as well, is that the government and members of the government, including congressmen and the president, the White House, everyone, uses the available federal machinery, as John Dean calls it, to deal with their political adversaries and the opposing parties. So let me read that quote again. John Dean said that the White House generally uses, quote, the available federal machinery to screw our political enemies, unquote. That's about as plainly as we can put it. And that's still what's going on since then. That's what happened before then. And in fact, the second article of the 1974 impeachment of Nixon was charging him with abusing IRS information. So once again, I hope the lesson's being learned here that history has a lot to tell us. If we put everything into historical context, it helps us understand today's current events. And when you put it in context of 100 years since the very inception of the IRS, 100 years of political abuse of the IRS, then this is just more of the same. So they'll trot out more talk of regulations and resignations. There already was a resignation today of a top IRS official. So anyway, this will just blow over as it has for the past 100 years, unless they may surprisingly get some political legs out of this. Who knows? But then no surprise, when Bill Clinton was president in 1995, the Democratic National Committee and the White House got together and put together a 331-page document called the, quote, Communication Stream of Conspiracy Commerce, unquote. And they used that as a guideline to target 20 different conservative groups, including the Heritage Foundation, for tax harassment. And and then George Bush, right after him. In 2004, George W. Bush instigated a 2-year audit of the NAACP and had threatened to remove their tax-exempt status, more or less implying that they were under attack for not supporting the war on Iraq. But of course, conservatives will say, well, under George W. Bush, of course, the NAACP had it coming, and therefore it was a noble effort, whereas Obama going after conservative Tea Party groups is outrageous. And the truth, of course, will lie somewhere in between. And then we also have the Landmark Legal Foundation sued the IRS in 1997 after being audited. And an IRS official revealed audit requests are regular from members of Congress and their staff. And this is another basic part of my premise, and I've even had commentators call me out on this, that, how could anybody but the White House be involved in ordering this? Well, as it turns out, like I say, and let me bring this up again, the Landmark Legal Foundation sued the IRS in 1997 after being audited, and under oath, an IRS official revealed that audit requests from members of Congress and their staff are regular, so that they don't even have to be congressmen, they can be staff members. And an AP report, Associated Press report that came out in 1999, 2 years after that, said, quote, officials in the Democratic White House and members of both parties in Congress have prompted hundreds of audits of political opponents in the 1990s, including personal demands for audits from members of Congress. IRS officials generally responded within 15 days, unquote. So there we have it. This scandal could very well lead to the top. It could lead to the Obama administration. I seriously have my doubts. And I've pointed out before, I'm not a supporter of Obama, and I'm not defending Obama. I just feel like these witch hunts and all these histrionics and all these manipulations of the base and all the media and Fox News and all these people whipping people into a frenzy over these straw man arguments and these dog and pony shows and this manufactured outrage. It doesn't wear well with me. And I know probably a lot of people who, especially party line drones, feel like you should support your so-called party, right or wrong, and whatever methods they use to attack and muddy the opponent, in this case the Republicans versus the Democrats, is worthwhile, even if it's not true. And I, for one, feel like there's plenty of things wrong with the Obama administration that are legitimate that they should go after, and keep an eye on the big picture than all these sideshow attractions. So there we have it, a long history of IRS abuse by politicians, everybody from the White House to congressmen and their staff, all using this to, quote, use the available federal machinery to screw our political enemies, unquote. So a long, long tradition of this going back 100 years. I'm not excusing what's going on now, but we have to be realistic about what's going on. I'm a useful idiot. Don't you be one too.